Hello, I'm Nathan Johanny, Extension Educator with University of Illinois Extension, and today we're going to be talking about cover crops for vegetable and fruit production in Illinois. Quite simply, cover crops are crops that are planted for the purpose of conserving natural resources, improving soil health, and preserving, adding, or cycling nutrients, and also managing weeds, among other benefits. Oftentimes, cover crops are planted during times when there's no other cash crop present in the field, times such as over winter or between summer crops. Cover crops have many benefits, many of which have to do with improving the soil, such as preventing erosion, reducing soil compaction, improving drainage, breaking up plow pans or hard layers in the soil, increasing water infiltration, and also increasing soil organic matter, all of which can help to allow cash crops to grow more profitably. Also, they're known for suppressing weeds, scavenging and holding nutrients, producing nitrogen and other nutrients, and improving soil tilth, protecting water quality, and also providing a habitat for beneficial insects, pollinators, earthworms, and other soil microorganisms. Also, they can provide suppression of nematodes as well. Overall, we think of cover crops providing increased soil health, which generally leads to increased crop health as well. But it's important to note that different cover crops do provide different benefits. As I just mentioned, many cover crops do have the ability to either scavenge or produce nutrients, especially nitrogen, and this can be a great source of nitrogen for future fruit and vegetable crops. This rate calculator tool is a great way to get an estimation of how much nitrogen a cover crop may have produced based off of sampling a small area of the cover crop biomass, getting the weight, and a lab analysis for nitrogen. In general, nitrogen production can vary greatly based off of the weather and, most importantly, the growth stage of the cover crop at the time of termination. Typically, the longer a legume cover crop has been growing, the greater the amount of nitrogen it has produced. Soil organic matter is a major contributor in the health and productivity of our soils, and cover crops are a very important tool in building organic matter. For every 1% of organic matter, the soil can hold an additional 1 inch of rainfall, which can be very crucial under drought conditions. Organic matter also helps to aggregate the soil and provide better soil structure, which allows for better water infiltration and decreases erosion and decreases the bulk density of the soil. Organic matter also contributes to the nutrients in the soil, especially nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, which future crops can benefit from. Overall, these qualities provide yield stability in drought years by allowing the soil to hold more water and nutrients. Unfortunately, there are many things that we do in crop production that can actually reduce soil organic matter, and most importantly, tillage. Every time we till or work the ground, we break up the natural structure of the soil and expose organic matter that quickly breaks down as it's exposed to oxygen. While tillage is essential to some fruit and vegetable crops, this is a very important thing to consider to understand so that we can look for ways to reduce any unnecessary tillage passes, work towards no-till production for some crops, and consider how to rebuild organic matter when tillage is necessary. There are many profitable production systems and practices that we can incorporate into fruit and vegetable production while still maximizing yield and also building soil organic matter. Cover crops are also an important part of preventing soil erosion. Soil coverage from cover crops can greatly prevent the loss of soil, which keeps it in the field where it benefits you the most. Many cover crop systems can also increase the microbial communities in the soil, which can lead to greater diversity of many beneficial soil microorganisms, which then, in case, can help plant growth and the cycling of nutrients. One fungi that is very beneficial to nutrient cycling is the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Beneficial insects can thrive with the added cover and habitat that cover crops provide. These insects play major roles in the cropping system, including pollination and being a predator of weed seeds. In a long-term cover crop system, cover crops even have the potential for reducing some pest pressure. Cover crops can also help to suppress weeds, especially when utilized in no-till production. Residue can block light that physically prevents weeds from germinating, and also it can moderate soil temperatures and control the release of nutrients, which then can slow flushes of new weeds. Also, some cover crops, such as cereal rye, have allelopathy, which is a chemical compound that the plant produces that suppresses other plants from germinating around them. Certain cover crops, such as those in the mustard family, also have the potential to be used as biofumigants. Mustards produce isothiocyanates, and if you can chop the green residue and incorporate it into the soil, the release of these compounds can help to suppress diseases and reduce weed populations. However, the results can vary greatly depending on environmental conditions and the crop growth, and thus far has not proven completely consistent, at least as consistent as other forms of fumigation commonly used. The next few slides are from some research conducted by Mike Plummer, a retired University of Illinois extension educator who's also a cover crop and no-till authority in southern Illinois. This slide shows the impact of cover crops on field corn during a drought year such as 2012. You can see many of the cover crop treatments provided a much higher yield, especially considering many of the non-cover cropped fields in the surrounding area struggled to make even 20 or 30 bushels per acre, and many of them much less than that. This also illustrates the importance of how you manage your cover crops. Note that the late-killed cover crop on the top was one of the lowest yielding treatments on this graph. And during very dry conditions, cover crops can actually pull up too much moisture out of the ground, not leaving much for the subsequent crop. Thus, if it's very dry early in the season, it is very important to pay close attention to the cover crops and to terminate them early before they remove all of the moisture from the soil. This shows a very good example of how compacted soils can get. Where the knife is shows a hard pan that's formed even by modest tillage in what would otherwise be a no-till system. These compacted layers can greatly decrease the crop's ability to root down into the soil. Consequently, here is the amount of root growth of the corn crop in this field. Compare that with this image of corn roots after multiple years of cover crops and no-till production in this field. After many years of no-till and cover crops, crop roots can find old root channels from cover crops and root very deeply into soil. In this case, we have corn roots going almost 5 feet deep. Cover crops are also very good at trapping nutrients. This graph shows the differences in nitrate concentrations in drainage water from two fields, one with no cover crop and the other with a cereal rye cover crop. In general, the cereal rye is able to reduce nitrate levels by more than half compared with having no cover crop. Not only is that nitrogen staying out of our lakes and rivers, but the cover crop is keeping it in the field for use by future crops. Now let's talk specifically about how to use cover crops in specialty crop production. Cover crops can be utilized to cover fields over the winter or between any summer plantings. Also, cover crops can be used as a green fallow treatment to build the soil for a season rather than cropping it. This can be a great addition to a crop rotation, helping to break up disease and insect cycles, and also to manage weeds, all the while building the soil as well. Also, you can plant cover crops between crop rows, and this works especially well between rows of black plastic, as the top picture shows, where you have annual ryegrass that's planted between rows of plasticulture strawberries. Cover crops are also important as pollinator habitats to encourage pollinators that are necessary for many fruit and vegetable crops. And lastly, cover crops can provide residue that can be utilized with no-till vegetable production. Cover crops especially have a very important role in no-till fruit and vegetable production. Residue can help low and ground-growing fruits and keep them clean of soil. It can also help to suppress weeds and also hold moisture in the soil. Also, it allows for better field access after it rains, which can be very important for crops that have to be harvested regardless of the weather. And many cover crops also help to add and hold nutrients for future crops to utilize. Here you can see some examples of how cover crops can be utilized in no-till vegetable production. At the top left, we have a picture of a fall crop of broccoli that was no-till planted after a cereal rye cover crop. The remaining pictures are of no-till transplanting pumpkins after wheat. Here are some additional no-till crops. At the top we have no-till transplant zucchini on the left, and then cucumbers on the right. And then below we have pictures of no-till planted green beans. All of these were following an oilseed radish, crimson clover, cereal rye cover crop mix. When choosing a cover crop, here are some things to consider. You want a cover crop that germinates quickly and is very competitive with weeds. It also needs to be tolerant of diverse environmental conditions, and the residue should be easy to manage. It should also provide some benefit to the soil or production system while still being economical to utilize. And now we will continue on briefly discussing the attributes of some common cover crop species. First, we have buckwheat. Buckwheat is a great summer cover crop that is a very good competitor with weeds and good at increasing plant available phosphorus in the soil. It is quick to establish and can start to form mature seeds in as little as 40 days. Buckwheat can reseed itself, so make sure to terminate it 7 to 10 days after the first flower to prevent it from becoming a weed problem. Next we have spring oats. Spring oats is another quick to establish cover crop that will grow well during the spring and summer. It is very good at scavenging nitrogen and also will naturally terminate in the fall once temperatures get down into the low 20s. Crimson clover is a great winter annual cover crop that is quick to establish and great at producing nitrogen. It needs to be established by late summer or early fall to ensure that it will be big enough in order to overwinter. Since crimson clover is an annual plant, it will naturally die off usually by late spring, which helps to make it easy to manage. Red clover is an excellent cover crop as a nitrogen producer and also as a perennial cover. It is often more slow to establish than crimson clover, so oftentimes red clover is seeded with oats as a companion crop. Planting techniques are similar to that of crimson clover. However, since it is a perennial, it is good for a green fallow year and can be mowed repeatedly at full bloom and it will regrow. It can be terminated either with tillage or with herbicides. Hairy vetch is another good legume cover crop that also can produce a great deal of nitrogen. It can also produce a large amount of very viney biomass, which can be very difficult to manage at planting time. So it's very important to have equipment that you know can handle hairy vetch. Oilseed radishes are a very popular cover crop, known for their ability to aerate and loosen the soil, and also scavenge large amounts of nutrients, especially nitrogen. They do winter kill and must be seeded by mid-August to mid-September to have substantial growth to provide the most benefit. Cereal rye is a great biomass producer and also weed suppressor. As I mentioned before, it has allelopathy, which also helps it to suppress weeds chemically. It is very deeply rooted, and it's a very good scavenger of nitrogen. Most notably, it's very cold hardy and can be planted very late into the fall with still very good rates of establishment. This picture shows the weed suppressing power of cereal rye 2 weeks after being mowed. Cereal rye is especially good at combating mare's tail. Annual ryegrass is also a great soil builder with a massive amount of root growth. It is very deeply rooted with roots going 3 feet or deeper into the soil. It also has the distinct ability to root through and break up hard pans and compacted layers in the soil. Annual ryegrass can be a challenge to terminate with herbicides, so make sure to monitor the growth and consult someone with experience to avoid having issues, or utilize tillage as termination method. For the best results, always use a known variety of annual ryegrass rather than one that says variety not stated, or VNS, as not all annual ryegrass varieties perform the same. Selecting and managing cover crops is very important to their success. Make sure you understand the biology of cover crops, your management goals, and consider the possibilities then of using multiple cover crops together. This USDA chart is very helpful at laying out the different cover crops and some of the traits of each. Tools like this can be very helpful in determining what crops would be best for your production system. Also, the Midwest Cover Crop Council has a great cover crop selector tool shown here, which can help you get specific information about your cover crop performance and about planting dates tailored to your area and specifically to your specific county. On the next few slides, we're going to cover some tips and techniques for planting cover crops. Planting date is crucial in determining cover crop performance and winter survival, as we'll see. If you are planting multiple cover crops together, make sure to decrease the seeding rates accordingly to prevent too much competition and wasting seed. Obviously, you don't need to provide a full rate of 3 or 4 or 5 cover crops and plant them all together in one space. There are multiple ways to seed cover crops. Broadcast seeding is by far the fastest, but you usually need some kind of minor soil movement, either via a harrow or also rainfall to get germination to occur. Drilling seeds with a grain drill is by far the best method to achieve a consistent and reliable stand. Also, in crops that are too tall to drive through, cover crops can be seeded by plane as well. As I mentioned, planting date is critical, and here you can see the difference that planting date has on oilseed radish. Note that if you plant too late, you'll get very little growth and likewise very little benefit from the cover crop. This tends to lead to a lot of frustration, especially in new cover croppers, and this is why I'm stressing the importance of planting date. Here also you can see the differences in nitrogen production from hairy vetch, even with just 10 days difference in planting date, which resulted in around 40 pounds less nitrogen produced just by planting 10 days later. As far as planting, as we said, using a grain drill produces the best stand that establishes the quickest. Here you can see visually the difference in the stand comparing a broadcast seeding with a light harrow to incorporate the seed compared with that of no-till drilling. Seeders can also be incorporated with other equipment that might be going through the field. This is a combine that has an air seeder attached to the head that delivers seed between each row as the corn is being harvested. On taller crops, aerial seeding can be a good way to plant cover crops in a timely fashion while the crop is still in the field. For many cover crops, cultipackers and corrugated rollers can be very useful to make a firm seed bed for better broadcast seeding establishment, especially when you have loose or tilled soils. Cover crop mixes can also be very beneficial. We can use mixes to help establish slower growing cover crops by intermixing faster growing cover crops with them, or we can have a mix just to gain a more diverse amount of benefits from a cover crop planting. If you do a cover crop mix, make sure to balance the mixes so that way the multiple species together are not too competitive with each other. Also, different crops can mature differently, adding additional challenges to spring termination needs. This is just one example of an online calculator that can help to determine the best proportion of cover crop seeds to mix together whenever planting a cover crop mix. Cover crop termination is another important part of managing cover crops. Herbicides, roller crimpers, mowing, and tillage, among others, are all good termination methods. Often, many cover crops can actually be easier to terminate as they approach flowering, especially cereal rye, which is pictured to the right in mid-flower. Different termination methods are also effective on different cover crops in different ways, so make sure that you understand the growth and biology of your cover crops to choose the best termination method for the greatest success. So now, looking at a cover crop rotation for your farm. Here's a sample cover crop rotation you might use on your farm. You have early spring vegetables that come out, and then you would follow that with the oats, radish, crimson clover mix in the mid to late summer. Then the next spring, you go into that same area and plant tomatoes, following that cover crop mix. After the tomatoes, then you plant a hairy vetch cereal rye cover crop mix and no-till cucumber plants into it the following spring. This is just one example to get you thinking about how to utilize cover crops in a fruit or vegetable production system. There are countless other rotations you could come up with. So in the end, here are my tips to be successful with cover crops. First, manage a cover crop as another crop in order to get the best performance out of it. Then also know that the weather and environmental conditions can always change your plan, so have a backup plan, especially for spring termination. Always consider the planting date when choosing a cover crop, because as we discussed, the wrong planting date alone can lead to poor cover crop performance and frustration on your part as a grower. Most importantly, learn from your experiences and explore ways to overcome any challenges that you might face. Keeping good notes and records on your cover crops can greatly help you to improve your cover cropping in the future. For more information on cover crops, I recommend the books Managing Cover Crops Profitably or the Midwest Cover Crop Field Guide. Both are great resources. In addition, consult a specialist in your area and experienced growers that have utilized cover crops. Also, cover crop field days and other events are very popular, and you can gain a lot of information and network with a lot of growers at these events. And finally, a picture of great success with cover crops in fruit production. This is a local grower that has had great success using annual ryegrass between the rows of black plastic and plasticulture strawberry production. The cover crop was broadcast seeded before setting the strawberry plants into the black plastic, And then in the spring, it's mowed to maintain a living cover that will make frequent harvest easier, especially in a wet year, all the while benefiting the soil as well. Hopefully today we've shed some light on cover crops, and please feel free to contact us if you have any further questions about cover cropping. Thank you.